حواليكي في ضرب رصاص؟ يا حبيبتي والله بدي اخذك بس مش بايدي هلا.
We have little information about the time Anne spent in Auschwitz-Birkenau. The Franks were housed in Women's Block 29. On the 28th of October, Anne and Margot were placed on another train and transferred to Bergen-Belsen. And Anne would never see her mother again.
تقول لي ما تسيبنيش يا ماما أنا جعانة أنا موجوعة يا ماما. قلت لها أنت وين يا هند مصابة؟ قالت لي أنا مصابة في إيدي وفي ظهري وفي رجلي.
By this time, the law in Germany had undergone a radical change. Jews were presented as a parasitic threat to German society.
אנחנו מטילים מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם.
By the 30th of January 1939, Hitler's rhetoric was pointing directly to the future genocide of Europe's Jews.
Gaza will become an area where people cannot live.
זהו מאבק, בדיוק כפי שנאמר כאן, מאבק בין בני האור לבני החושך.
And the sight of German soldiers soon became commonplace. Anne had been scared during the invasion.
Anne was escorted downstairs with the others, hustled into the van and taken to the station. There they were all put on a train for Germany. Tragically, it was the very last convoy of Jews to leave Amsterdam.
On the 2nd of September, the Franks were called forward to board a train. They departed Westerbork the following day. Otto Frank recalled how Anne gazed out of the train window, after which the train ground to its last stop, Auschwitz.
يا رب تحمينا. يا رب تحمينا.
2 weeks into the search, a mother says goodbye to her 6-year-old daughter, Hind Rajab.
British troops arrived at Bergen-Belsen. Anne and Margot were not found. Both had died, probably from typhus, just days before their liberators arrived. In most biographies, childhood is but a single chapter in a life full of other experiences and events. This biography, in contrast, covers only 15 years.
I want the whole world to know that I'm a human being. At the end, I am not pen on paper. I'm not anonymous. I'm a human being created by God.
You know, the reason the world remembers Anne Frank is not because she's the only Jewish child who suffered during the Holocaust, because so many countless nameless Jewish kids during the Holocaust died horribly. But the difference with Anne is that she left behind a diary. And similarly for Hind Rajab, because Hind Rajab is obviously not the only Palestinian child who died. Officially now it's 17,000 kids, but it's much more. When all is said and done, when the dust settles, and they're going to find kids under the rubble, it's going to be God knows how many. But why do we know Hind Rajab? Because she too left something behind, the phone call. And for me, that's what's similar about Hind and Anne, is that they represent countless other children whose stories we'll never know. In this video, I'm going to get into the harrowing details of Hind Rajab's final moments, which were captured during that phone call, and the countless parallels between her agony and that of Anne Frank. But there are also similarities in the context surrounding the two girls. In 1929, when Anne was just 4 months old, there was the Wall Street crash, which plunged the world into crisis. Unemployment, unrest, and collapse of social services in Germany followed. Many Europeans turned to the age-old scapegoat to blame for the mess: the Jews. When Anne was just 1 year old, Mein Kampf was republished, which included passages such as, "No nation can rid itself of Jews except by the sword." Basically, the Nazi Party was growing in popularity as Anne was growing up. Similarly, in Hind Rajab's story, in her 6 years of life, the rise of the fascist right in Israel was meteoric. If you take Ben Gvir, who literally went from extremist settler to Israel's national security minister in less than 4 years. Just 4 years ago, when Hind was only 2, in the March 2020 elections, his party was shunned by other right-wingers and managed only 0.42% of the total votes. Today, Ben Gvir is part of the political elite, so those are the backdrops in the girls' lives. 90 years apart, but frighteningly similar in racism and fascism.
The specifics are different, but the goal is the same: erasure. We celebrate our religion, our nation, our superiority, by negating and erasing yours.
Now let's get to the specifics of Hind Rajab's story. Hind, whom I'm calling the Anne Frank of Palestine. And feel free to call her that, by the way, and spread the word about her being the Anne Frank of Palestine. Because this is, I think, where we go wrong when we speak about Palestinian children. We keep counting numbers. 17,000, 20,000, and in the future it's going to be 50,000. These numbers don't matter. When you list numbers, it has no effect. It's stories that people connect to and resonate with. Everyone here in the Netherlands knows the details about Anne Frank. And that she was having a crush on a boy and she wrote about him in her diary and everyone's like, oh, and as they should. But the Palestinian kids is like, oh, his head was decapitated. What? No, we need to know who these people were. So let's repeat her name and tell people who Hind Rajab was.
On January 29th, a harrowing call came into the Palestinian Red Crescent Society. A 6-year-old girl, Hind Rajab, was trapped, being shot at by Israeli occupation forces. Every other family member in the car had already been killed. In a call that lasted for hours, the terrified child begged the Red Crescent to please come and rescue her.
Now picture a 6-year-old girl that you know. Your daughter, your niece, your friend's daughter. Now imagine that 6-year-old girl that you know, trapped inside a car, surrounded by dead corpses, who are dead from being shot at. Imagine the fear inside this child.
أنا معك ليجي حدا ياخذك ما بدي أسيبك لحالك.
Imagine the fear in the pit of her stomach, knowing fully well that she's going to be next. It actually reminds me of Anne Frank's story when she was hearing about kids being sent to gas chambers.
The time Anne spent in Auschwitz, women who knew her there would recall that she was quiet and that she wept when she saw children being led to the gas chambers.
She knew that there's a big possibility that she's going to be next. She and her family knew. Now let's go back to Hind Rajab, and before we imagine what it's like to be that girl, let's even imagine what it's like to be that phone call operator, knowing fully well that you won't be able to save that girl, but you have to keep her on the line, you have to give her hope. One of the most heartbreaking moments is when she started reading Quran with her, just praying to God basically.
ونقرأ قرآن وأدعي شوي. شو رأيك؟ طيب. نحكي بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم.
And speaking of Muslims praying and trying to find solace and peace against this killing machine that they're up against, when they resort to reading Quran just to calm down, they're being called terrorists. Allahu Akbar. What? Imagine you had a 6-year-old girl on the other end knowing she's about to die and you have the task to calm her down. We're going to get to Hind Rajab's call in full later. That's coming and we're going to listen to it together as a family. I want to point out that the dead relatives around Hind weren't her parents. It was her uncle, her aunt, and her other cousins. Hind's parents actually put her in the car with her relatives, thinking they're going to save her. Because Hind's family has been attempting to leave Gaza City since the beginning of the assault by Israel. The same way Anne's father was constantly planning the escape of his family. Before it was too late, of course.
Otto and Edith remained very concerned, and their fate to be determined by a new hostile state.
Hind's mother and older siblings were attempting the trek by foot. But because of the cold and the rain, Hind's mother sent her in the car with her aunt, uncle, and cousins, thinking this would be safer and less arduous for her baby girl.
And in the early hours of January 29th, Hind and her relatives left the house in Tel El-Hawa neighborhood of Gaza City. At 9:30 a.m., after the car took off, an Israeli spokesperson posted an evacuation order in Arabic on social media, asking residents of West Gaza City, including the Tel El-Hawa neighborhood, to move south. An analysis of satellite imagery shows that it was not possible for Hind and her relatives to drive south that morning because the road was blocked by debris from a recently bombarded high-rise building. And Hind's mother actually witnessed the shots being fired from an intersection near the home. By the way, can you imagine being Hind's mother? She actually called her mother as well, besides calling the Red Crescent Society.
قلت لها أنت وين يا هند مصابة؟ قالت لي أنا مصابة في إيدي وفي ظهري وفي رجلي.
Anyway, the shots that her mother witnessed had to have come from an Israeli military tank, because the tanks that are visible in satellite images on that intersection from the day of the attack have the shape and size consistent with that of Israeli Merkava tanks. But looking at such maps is of course a very dehumanizing, very depersonalizing way of looking at what happened. Let's actually remember that there was a little girl hiding inside the car that is captured in these images. Hiding in the car but her fate was already sealed. This moment of Hind being in the car, of basically being in the crosshairs of Israel, calls to mind the moment the Franks were put on the train and sent to the camps. Similarly, Anne Frank's fate was sealed the second she was put on that train. What's similar about Anne and Hind is that they were two defenseless girls who represent a defenseless population facing a ruthless enemy. The similarities don't end there because it's also in the methods, because you have to keep in mind the Israelis, like their Nazi predecessors, killed over a long period of time. There were other techniques other than firing and bombing and gas chambers. There was also starvation and spreading of diseases.
The Franks were housed in Women's Block 29. Margot and Anne, suffering from terrible skin conditions brought on by the dirt and muck, were soon transported to the so-called scabies block.
Sewage systems, desalination plants and water supply networks have all been destroyed by Israeli attacks. Temporary shelters with no running water, toilets or sanitation are a breeding ground for the rapid spread of disease.
And it's not just skin diseases, it's all sorts of diseases that are going to end up killing Palestinian children over the next years. And speaking of illnesses and diseases, way before October 7, a lot of sick children in Gaza were getting denied medical treatment because to get medical treatment, you need to get a permit to leave. And people in Gaza are trapped, right? And there's a backlog that goes for months and sometimes years. Like in 2019 alone, Israel denied 363 exit permit applications for Palestinian children referred for medical treatment. Actually, you know Francesca Albanese, right? Of course you know her. Icon. I once heard her, also before October 7, talking about interviewing children in Gaza. And she was interviewing these two little girls. One of them had terminal illness, I believe it was cancer. And she got the permit to go to the West Bank to get treatment. And Francesca was talking to the two girls. And she was asking the girl who's healthy, like how she feels about her best friend going away. She's like, I wish I have cancer so I can get permit to leave. Imagine what life is like in Gaza. 55% of the people living in Gaza are literal children, trapped, who just look out at the ocean knowing they're never going to be able to leave. Speaking of Francesca, you know what's coming. I had to play her.
And as Italian Holocaust survivor Primo Levi reminds us, it is the amnesia of the past and the erasure of its victims that allows history to repeat itself. Yesterday, I presented my second report on genocide. Why so? Why do I insist in calling it genocide? Because it's so difficult to prove intent. Why don't you go with war crimes and crimes against humanity? Because if you go to a doctor and you have cancer and you are diagnosed with fever, you have a problem, a big problem, and it's the same with the people who's being genocided. Because it's not about a collection of war crimes and crimes against humanity that the Palestinians are experiencing. They have experienced through their entire life as a people war crimes and crimes against humanity. But nowadays, the situation is different. And it's very important that we understand what is genocide and why this is to be recognized as a genocide. Because in the same way as the international community has failed to protect the victims of genocide in the case of the Jewish people in Europe, in the same way, we are failing the Palestinians.
Hey guys, it's In Denial. The past few weeks have been just realizing that this has been going on for more than a year. This is the second Christmas and this is still happening. It's a rough one, but it fits what we're talking about in this video. I usually do this joke where I'm in denial so you can wake up, but I don't have it in me to make jokes. But I just want to quickly thank all the people who donated to my videos in the last couple of months and also all the new members to the channel. Thank you guys so much. Now back to Hind, the Anne Frank of Palestine.
Of the millions, literally millions of stories to come out of the Holocaust, why do you think this one resonates the way it does?
People were shown the concentration camps, the atrocities that took place, the horror. And suddenly you find this innocent girl And she, as a lighthouse, comes out of the darkness. And then I think humanity said, this is who we are.
واحدة بتحكي لي أنت أم هند رجب، بحكي لها هي بتحكي لي بنتك صارت من عمل لها قاعة في كولومبيا. أنا الصراحة قعدت أعيط، بس يعني انبسطت إنه ممكن قضية هند تحرك في إشي في هالعالم، يعني ممكن تكون هند إيدها سبب في إنه تعمل إشي في القضية الفلسطينية.
My goal with this video is to do what her mother asked, what Hind's mother asked. Honor her, basically. Which is also what forensic architecture did. The people who did this thorough investigation about the killing of Hind Rajab, whose videos, all these figures, I'm using from them. They did the investigation in close collaboration with Earshot, which is specialized in sonic investigation. The sonic or sound analysis is very important because during the phone call, we hear shots, bullets. And there was an analysis done on the bullets to see how far the tank was from the car, i.e., could they see that there were children inside the car? Because, by the way, there were a lot of bullets, not just in Hind's call, but there was another call coming from the car before Hind.
First call into the Red Crescent actually came from Hind's 15-year-old cousin, Leanne. Leanne told them her parents and siblings had already been killed.
So Leanne's parents and siblings, who are Hind's uncle and cousins, were dead. Imagine being a 15-year-old girl and a 6-year-old girl trapped inside a car that's being shot at by a tank nearby. And everyone around you is dead. Just imagine.
Hello? Hello, مرحبا عمو. الو مرحبا.
ايوه بتدخل علينا. الدبابة جنبي.
انتوا متخبيين؟
في السيارة، احنا جنبينا الدبابة.
انتوا جوا السيارة؟
After a series of audible shots, Leanne's voice can be heard screaming until it comes to an abrupt end. Now imagine being Hind, the 6-year-old, witnessing that, and then going for the phone and redialing and trying to talk to the dispatchers to send help. 6-year-old. Now, according to the sonic analysis by Earshot, a total of 64 gunshots can be heard, fired in just 6 seconds, a range of 750 to 900 rounds per minute. This range exceeds that of an AK-type rifle used by Hamas, but is consistent with an Israeli army-issued weaponry. Earshot found that with the minimum registered interval of 24 milliseconds, this tank would have to have been positioned at just 13 meters away from the car. At such proximity, it is not plausible that the shooter from the tank could not have seen that there were civilians inside the car, including children. In other words, they saw Leanne and Hind. So then the second call came, which is Hind's call, the subject of this video. After Leanne died, the very brief 28-second phone call that ended abruptly, Hind called.
Come take me, she says. Come take you? Please, I'm scared. Come quick. Call someone to come take me. Please. Okay, my dear, I will come and take you. Now a volunteer from the Red Crescent is coordinating so we can come and take you.
By the way, this is standard in war zones, that aid workers and medics coordinate with the army. They call them standard deconfliction methods to protect medics from coming under fire.
You can imagine these medic heroes so close to Hind, barely out of reach when their vehicle was targeted and their own lives taken.
But Israel doesn't care. We all saw what they did to the World Kitchen staff earlier this year.
It's been a deadly day for humanitarian workers in Gaza after an Israeli strike ripped through a World Central Kitchen vehicle. Among the mangled metal, the most humble of items being transported to feed desperately hungry Palestinians.
By the way, speaking of those who put their lives at risk to save children like Hind, we're going to get into the details of how the paramedics died, because that is a whole other level of sadism and sickness. Because the paramedics that went in to rescue her eventually also got killed. But we'll get to that in a minute. But I just want to highlight that this reminds me of those who were aiding Anne Frank's family and other Jews, people who were hiding Jews. And this is very big here in the Netherlands, by the way. People who were putting their lives at risk to save Jews.
Mentioning the annex to anyone outside the core inner circle risked being discovered, and those who provided food, news and aid to the annex's inmates were racked with nerves.
But let's get back to Hind Rajab and the Red Crescent medics who went in to rescue her.
The Red Crescent jumped into action to try to rescue this child. They reached out to the IDF in an attempt to secure safe passage for their ambulance and for the rescuers. For hours, they waited to hear back from the Israelis as Hind pleaded for help, telling them to please come, that she was afraid of the dark. Finally, after 3 long hours, the Red Crescent got the green light. The ambulance had been cleared to move to Hind's location.
Permission from the Israeli army to send an ambulance to help Hind came at 5:40 p.m. when the sun was setting. It was starting to get dark.
According to the Red Crescent dispatcher, it wasn't long before that ambulance also came under IDF fire. Quote, first, the paramedics said the Israeli forces are putting laser lights on them, and then we heard a gunfire sound before we lost the connection. It was like a gunfire or explosion. We were not sure of what happened.
And this is where you see Israel's sadism. They give the ambulance permission, give everyone hope that they're about to be saved. Just that push was so sadistic. Again, another similarity with Anne's story, this push and pull. Anne thinking she's gonna get saved before that gets snatched away again.
The family always had their bags packed for an emergency departure, and it was hard to keep believing that they would one day be liberated. The family had some hope. The Allies had, by this time, invaded and established a firm foothold in Europe. There was hope of liberation.
But there was no liberation for Anne, and there was no liberation for Hind.
Anne pinned this old school map on the wall and began to mark the line of the Allied advance. On July the 21st, she wrote in her diary, "Now I am getting really hopeful."
But 2 weeks later, Anne heard the sound she had always dreaded. It was the German police patrol.
Hind and her relatives were killed attempting to flee Gaza City when their car encountered Israeli tanks.
Israeli troops moved out, and Hind's family was able to return to the area and locate the destroyed vehicle where Hind had issued her final desperate plea.
For days, the Red Crescent heard nothing from the medics who went to rescue Hind, and the heavy IDF presence made it impossible to send more people to go in and check. Red Crescents were posting on social media pleas for anyone to give them information what's going on, anyone in the area. And then finally, 12 days later, on February 10th, 2024, following the withdrawal of the Israeli military,
paramedics found the bodies of Hind, her uncle, her aunt, and their 3 children inside this black car.
عمود فقري وجمجمة وريحانة حوض. هذا بدلل انه تم استهداف سيارة الاسعاف وعدم احترام لا قوانين دولية ولا اعراف انسانية.
A kinetic analysis shows that the car was pushed from the front, the rotation of the steering wheel, deformation of the tire, and furthermore, the shape of the depression of the windshield suggests that it was run over by a vehicle such as a military bulldozer. By comparing satellite imagery captured during the 12 days between the attack and the date the evacuation order was lifted, forensic architecture was able to show that the car was moved. And 50 meters away from the car, the bodies of the 2 Palestine Red Crescent Society paramedics were found in the bombed ambulance. And by the way, the final moments of those 2 paramedics were also gut-wrenching. It was very brief, not hours long like Hind, but when they arrived, this was, by the way, the exchange between them and the dispatchers. Because remember, they arrived when it was already getting dark, so it was difficult to see. So the control room asks the paramedics, "Can you see the car?" The paramedic says, "I can't see a thing here." The control room goes, "Do you have your siren and flashing lights on?" The paramedics say, "Just the lights, not the siren." And then he goes, "Oh, there it is," and boom, that's when you hear the explosion.
Red Crescent crew Yusuf Zaino and Ahmed Al-Madoun were also murdered by the IDF in spite of being in a van clearly marked ambulance and in spite of having received explicit permission for the operation by the IDF.
The analysis from forensic architecture shows that the size of the exit hole in the ambulance car is consistent with the impact of an M83-0A1, which is an American-made explosive sold to Israel. Comparing the exit hole and levels of destruction helps reconstruct the impact and reveals the direction from which the ambulance was shot. This direction is consistent with the location of the Israeli tanks in the satellite imagery from between January 29th and February 8th.
Now, you can see in this video, first you're looking here at the ambulance, and then within sight, down the road, is the car where Hind spent her final hours.
Now just imagine how Hind spent her last few hours on this earth. Begging for help, frightened in the car. Are we ready to listen to the phone call? We're going to listen to it together.
ميتين؟ وهم هلأ معك بالسيارة؟ انت هلا وين متخبي هلا؟ وين انت هلا محمية؟
بالسيارة.
جوا السيارة انت صح؟ مش برا السيارة.
صح.
طيب خليكي يا عمري بالسيارة. أنا حتمني فاتح الخط معاكي، أتمني أحكي معك، ما بدي أسكر التليفون. تمام؟
الدبابة جنبية.
الدبابة وين؟
جنبية.
الدبابة جنبكم؟ عم تتحرك ولا واقف؟ نزل حدا منها؟
هي بتتحرك.
تتحرك؟ هي بتتحرك جنب السيارة ولا هي جاي من ورا السيارة أو من قدام السيارة؟
من قدام السيارة.
هي جاية عليكي من قدام السيارة الدبابة؟ قريب كتير؟
كتير.
وعم تمشي؟ طيب ما بدنا نخاف.
نحكي معك.
أنا معك يا عمري، أنا معك، أنا معك ليجي حدا ياخدك، ما بدي أسيبك لحالك.
لما يجي حدا بتفكر طيب؟
إيه؟
لما يجي حدا يكون بتفكري.
لا أنا بتمني معاكي لأطمن إنه حدا هلال أو حدا جاي ياخدك. بديش أفصل، حتى أنت إذا أجا لا سمح الله الجيش ما تفصلي، خلي الخط مفتوح، ما بدنا نفصل، أنا معاكي. إيش يا عمري؟ يا حبيبتي يا عمري والله معك، هيني أنا مش تاركك، بحكي معاكي، ما بدي أصلا أتركك.
أكثر من ساعة.
إيه؟
أكثر من ساعة. أنا بكون موجودة عند عيلة.
إيش؟
عند عيلة فقط.
حبيبتي والله لو بإيدي لأجيكي نحكي يا الله.
يا الله.
يا رب احمينا.
يا رب احمينا.
In case this wasn't painful enough, forensic architecture mapped a total of 335 bullet holes on the body of the car. Most bullet hole entries were located on the right side of the vehicle, once again confirming the position of the shooters. How close they were, how cut off from their humanity they were, and are, because they're still killing Palestinian children today. Think of how many Hinds we don't know about. And by the way, the lucky ones who didn't die are the ones who are roaming now the streets of Gaza barefoot without their parents. The unaccompanied children, the orphans, those are the lucky ones. And imagine the fear they're going through. Like 15 months of relentless bombing. Just waking up and sleeping with this bombing that's happening, the fear. By the way, there are statistics now that are coming out about how many kids actually wish to die in Palestine. We haven't even gone to talk about mental health. By the way, this is another parallel between Hind and Anne's story.
Anne met one of her friends from home, Haneli, in the camp, and the two would speak together either side of a barbed wire fence. Anne was herself incredibly ill. She believed her father and mother were both dead, and she confessed to Haneli that she did not want to live any longer.
And this is what will never be over. These reports of kids as young as 5 going to doctors and saying they'd rather be dead. Yep. The little boy who lay down in the road to sleep because he hoped he would be run over after his family was killed.
Yet Palestinians stay and have continued to stay and will continue to stay, and that's what kills the Israelis. They don't understand this rootedness, this belonging to the land. They don't get it because they're not from there.
And the same thing is the relation between the people and the land. For indigenous people, the land is not the place where they live. The land is who they are. And this is why we need to understand the bigger design behind what's happening in Palestine today. Under the fog of war, Israel accelerates the forced displacement of the Palestinians. Because the way I know the question of Palestine is through the forced displacement of its people. Palestinians have been kicked out of their land amid the destruction of their villages and everything they had from 1947-49 and in 1967, and it continues. And what's happening today, it's much more severe because of the technology, because of the weaponry, but also because of the impunity that has been granted to the State of Israel over 76 years. The hubris that has led Israel to attack not just the Palestinian people, but the United Nations. This year has also marked an attack against the United Nations physically. Israel has damaged or in any way bombed and targeted and hit 70% of UNRWA infrastructure in Gaza. And it has killed 230 UN staff members. No one has been spared, not just among the Palestinians and the Lebanese. It's time to consider suspending the credential of Israel as a member state. I understand the sensitivity because none of you has really clean hands when it comes to human rights. That's okay, but no one else has maintained an unlawful occupation as Israel has done. Enough.
Like Nazi Germany, Israel acts in ways that are not bound to any laws or any norms, nothing. Like for example, in order to get Nasrallah in Lebanon, they flattened 6 residential buildings. Just boom. And remember, like last year when it was still a big deal to bomb a hospital, even they weren't sure they were going to get away with it. They had to release these animation videos of bunkers and tunnel systems under the hospital, but then they saw that the world doesn't care. Now they just bomb hospitals every day. No proof, no even mention of Hamas, just bombing medical centers. Like, Palestinians dying is just inevitable, that's what has to happen. I went out, by the way, for this dinner a month ago with a friend who, not a friend, an acquaintance, just someone I know from the film days. So me, her, and her 2 friends were out having dinner at this Indian restaurant. And they asked me like after how are you doing? And I said, today was, and I had just been watching a lot of videos about Palestine that day. And I said, I don't know. They're like, what's up? And I said, Palestine. And they looked at me like nothing. Usually when you tell people, I'm not asking everyone to be like horrified, but a normal reaction when you are against children dying, you would be like, fuck, maybe I don't know enough. That's okay as well to say, I don't know enough, but that's heartbreaking. But they had not, as if I said nothing. As if I said, can I have some water? They were just looking at me eating. I was so stunned by the lack of reaction that I had to like add a qualifier, almost like auditioning for sympathy. By the way, I'm Palestinian, I said. Again, no reaction, just eating. And these aren't terrible people, but just it shows you how deeply ingrained this idea of you just accept that Palestinians die. It's inevitable. We don't like it. I mean, sure, it sucks that children die, but they kind of brought it on themselves, right? Like, a little bit. Because people like that can't even bring themselves to accept the idea that Israel wants to erase Palestinians.
When were you in Gaza?
End of April for the first couple weeks of May.
Dr. Mark Perlmutter, an orthopedic surgeon from North Carolina and vice president of the International College of Surgeons, volunteered in Gaza.
40 mission trips, 30 years, ground zero, earthquakes, all of that combined doesn't equal the level of carnage that I saw against civilians in just my first week in Gaza.
And when you say civilians, is it mostly children?
Almost exclusively children. I've never seen that before. And then there's sniper bullets. I have children that were shot twice.
Wait, you're saying that children in Gaza are being shot by snipers?
Definitively. I have 2 children that I have photographs of that were shot so perfectly in the chest I couldn't put my stethoscope over their heart more accurately, and directly on the side of the head in the same child. No toddler gets shot twice by mistake by the world's best sniper.
They don't want Palestine to have a future. And children, as Whitney Houston once said, the children are the future. So killing Palestinian children is a way of making sure there's no more Palestinians in the future. But they could never. By the way, another goal of Israel, besides wiping out the Palestinians, is the humiliation.
What we get in the videos are the most dramatic moments, right? It's people getting pulled from the rubble. It's the blood, it's the gore. But what's absent in a lot of that reportage is the daily humiliation, the daily reduction of human life, the lack of hygiene, and what that does to human beings, what it means for parents on a daily basis to not send their kids to school, what it means to wait in line for hours to use a shared toilet, and to structure your whole day around just trying to get to that toilet. What it means to live in a tent where sand gets into everything. It gets into every crevice every bite of food you eat, your hair into your scalp. All of these details of the daily degradation.
You know, watching this for more than a year, and now as well digging in Anne's story, I didn't know much. I mean, I knew about Anne Frank, of course, but I didn't know the details, and also of what the Nazi soldiers used to do. When you realize also in Anne's story, Nazi soldiers, they used to humiliate and degrade Jews during the Holocaust. And it makes you think, like, are Israelis just taking out revenge on Palestinians of something more than just October 7? They're avenging the stories that they grew up hearing about, stories about the Holocaust.
Each prisoner had a number tattooed on their left forearm, were stripped and all the hair on their body shaved. Degradation after degradation was meted out to the prisoners, who were forced to shower in dirty water and then handed ragged outfits.
And it's the same thing that happens to Palestinians now. I mean, just have you seen this image of this boy who's eating grass? And this degradation of Palestinians did not start on October 7th. This is what Israeli soldiers are trained to do for years.
אסור לחשוב שהם אנשים בסדר, קשי יום שמנסים לשרוד במקום סגור.
אחר כך הבנתי שכאילו, בשביל להיות שם, אז צריך לשבור להם את הרוח, לשבור אותם. לשבור אותם זה אומר שיחכו, ושיהיה להם בד על העיניים, ושתייחסו להם לא יפה, ושיכתבו מוות לערבים על השכפ"ץ.
But the idea of openly treating Palestinians in this way became permissible after October 7th. That's the only difference. And this is not unlike 1930s Germany. Because, by the way, the gas chambers wasn't the first thing that happened. It just, boom, you go from 0 to 100. No. In the beginning, it was Jews have to register their businesses, and the bank accounts of Jews were getting closed in Germany. So it was like slowly, gradually building up to that. And then there was the ice cream ammonia incident. That's one of the things that gave permission, okay, let's go in now.
Between February the 9th and February the 11th, 1941, Jewish patrons of the Cocoa ice cream parlor, frustrated by constant menacing from the NSB, threw ammonia at a German police division who entered the store. These events gave the regime just the opportunity they had been looking for.
In a way, October 7 is that ice cream incident. It's the excuse to do what they've always wanted to do. All the atrocities that have happened after October 7 are justified by October 7, including the killing of Hind. And by the way, Israel is still investigating the killing of Hind.
The premier outlets of Western journalism, the Times, the Post, CNN, and the BBC, all failed to use the word killed or to so much as mention Israel in their headlines about Hind's murder. New York Times' choice here is emblematic. Quote, missing 6-year-old and rescue team found dead in Gaza, aid group says, as if they just dropped dead under mysterious circumstances.
By the way, the State Department spokesperson, Matt Miller, was asked about the killing of Hind Rajab and the use of the American-made weapons, shell fragments from the American-made M83-0A1.
Have you seen that report, and do you have any response?
Yeah, we are devastated about the reports of the death of Hind Rajab. I will tell you that I have a little girl that's about to turn 6 myself, and so it is just a devastating account, a heartbreaking account for this child, and of course there have been thousands of other children who have died as a result of this conflict. And every one of them is a tragedy that I know, I can tell you, everyone in the United States government feels quite deeply. We have asked the Israeli authorities to investigate this incident.
You know that bit where he goes, everyone in the US government feels very deeply. Oh yeah? I hope you feel deeply. I hope you feel so deeply that you never get a single second of rest or sleep ever in your life. And that thing of him bringing up his own 6-year-old was a nice touch. Dracula has feelings. Wow. And by the way, there's a reporter from Zeteya called Prem Taker who's been following up with the State Department over the investigation of Hind Rajab's killing. Since January, he keeps bringing up time and time again.
I think that question is appropriately directed to the government of Israel. I will say on behalf of the United States, we have made clear to them that we want that incident to be investigated. They have told us they are investigating it.
Any updates on Hind Rajab's, the investigation in the killing of Hind Rajab's family and the paramedics sent to save her?
I don't have an update. My understanding is that the investigation is ongoing.
How can this administration's approach of relegating things to months-long investigations while not changing policy, all as thousands more are killed, be a justified approach?
Investigations in some cases take time. You heard me a minute ago say we want them in every case to be conducted swiftly, but not at the expense of thoroughness.
It's been 101 days now since Hind Rajab, her family members, the medics sent to save her were killed. So first question related to that is there an update on the investigation into that attack?
I don't have anyone. I'm happy to go back and get you the latest.
Is there an update into this investigation?
Let me get you an answer on that and come back to you.
Is it really an independent investigation if the alleged culprits are the ones conducting the strike?
What I said, we thought it's appropriate for the government of Israel to investigate. What they have said is they went to these agencies and asked for information, and it wasn't forthcoming.
I reached out to the Red Crescent, and they said that no, the Israeli government did not reach out. So, has the Biden-Harris administration followed up on this alleged lie by the Israeli government, or sought to confirm any of Israel's claims on the half-year-old killing now of this girl and her family?
So we are in touch with our partners in Israel around the clock on a variety of issues. I don't have any specifics to read out as it relates to this conversation. I'm happy to track if there have been any additional updates, but to my understanding, this investigation is still ongoing, and I will leave it to them to speak to the details of it.
It's now 197 days since Hind Rajab was killed, and was killed, and the next 6 they were killed. What's the update on that?
I don't have any updates for you.
How can people have Action North's family take an investigation seriously that's conducted by the perpetrator, and moreover, they continue to delay and reportedly lie to the U.S. about their investigation into Hind Rajab?
Well, that is exactly why we have called and have continued to call for these processes to be as swift and as thorough as possible.
When can Americans expect a conclusion?
Any American can expect that this administration, this government, will do everything we can to ascertain whatever information is required.
I can't speak on behalf of either the Israelis or the NGOs about what is true and what isn't, but that's what we've been told by the parties.
How can it be prepared to send more of the same rounds Israel reportedly used to kill Hind Rajab if all these days later it can't get to some sort of conclusion on such a well-known?
But you guys, maybe we're being suspicious of Israel. Maybe they are carrying out the investigation. It just takes time. It does take time. Time to come up with a story with how the ambulance they cleared was actually a command and control center for Hamas. Or maybe that Hind herself was a Hamas leader. You never know. Hamas. But just so that you know, while these people are still running cover for Israel and hiding the crimes shamelessly, with no morality or conscience whatsoever, countless other children like Hind continue to die. Kids whose names we'll never know. I want to go back to why it's important to understand Hind's story in the context of Anne and the Holocaust. Childhood is normally a small part of all our lives. But in the case of Anne and Hind, that brief childhood was the only life they knew.
It was reported in her baby book that Anne loved her uncle Julius and was delighted whenever he entered the room. Her parents also noted that she was becoming an inquisitive child and asked almost constant questions.
أحلى طفلة في العالم هند وأبسط طفلة في العالم حلمها تكون طبيبة حتى اللي راحوا ينقذوها الأطباء استشهدوا يعني ما ضلش إشي حلمها تكون طبيبة وترجع على البيت بس يا الله ما أبسط حلمها.
I know that there is an Anna Frank Foundation, Mr. Frank. What is the purpose and the aim of it?
Well, in short, I should say to fight against prejudice and discrimination, respectively hatred against people of different race and religion.
By the way, I want to mention the Hind Rajab Foundation in Belgium. It's devoted to breaking the cycle of Israeli impunity and honoring the memory of Hind Rajab, and they opened a case against 1,000 Israeli soldiers with the ICC with evidence. And I know that's not enough to give us hope, like things like the Hind Rajab Foundation, but we can't lose hope. One of my subscribers actually sent me this clip of Gabor Mate speaking about this, and it really resonates with how I've been thinking about it in the last couple of months, that we have to let go of the idea that we're going to see justice and freedom in the short term. It's horrible, but we have to let go of that.
People have been trying to stop suffering, end cruelty, promote healing, promote peace. I mean, you're a theologian, you know all these great avatars of spiritual truth. Take the Buddha. How's universal love going? Jesus. How is forgiving your brothers and your enemies and turning the other cheek? How's that going? So you might say they're failures. Are they? Or did they not contribute massively to a human project that is a long-term project? In our own little ways, we can each do the same thing. It's not ours to finish, so we can't take it personally.